Hey, this is Michael Lindsay from Vital MX. We're out here at Fox Raceway Day, putting our first impressions in for the 2019 Honda CRF250R. As we all know, the 2018 CRF250R was a huge overhaul for Honda, basically an all-new generation bike with almost no carryovers, and the first major redesign of an engine they've really ever done for their 250, completely changing the architecture, going from a unicam to dual cams, a completely different bore and stroke, pipe configuration, intake, just a wildly different engine. And what we found last year is the bike was really well received. The chassis and suspension were well raved by all of our test riders, initial tests, in the shootout, but where it really faltered was the engine in sort of a manner. They really changed the type of power it had. The prior generation was a lot of low to mid without the top end grunt, but a really torquey feeling bike. The new one, they really tried to cater it to the typical 250 racer. They went for really mid to top style power, completely reversing, going from being the largest stroke and smallest bore in the class to the shortest stroke and biggest bore in the class, overshooting even the KTM. While they definitely accomplished the goal of getting that top end power and the real high RPM pull, they really lost out on low end performance, mostly the roll on torque feel. Of course, a lot of people will compare this instantly to the Yamaha, that's kind of the king of the class there, but even compared to, say, the KTM, the Husqvarna, Kawasaki, it was even down in the aspect to them. So really, Honda was smart for 2019. They left the chassis and the suspension alone. That was all very well received, and they focused all their efforts really on the engine performance side. They did a new exhaust cam, they shortened the duration, they changed the intake and exhaust porting in the cylinder head. They went from a 46 to a 44 millimeter throttle body, and they also shortened the right side exhaust by 50 millimeters. Everything here is to try to get more low to mid performance, more of a torque feel, while at the same time trying to keep the high end or top end performance that they already had. Really, by changing the intake porting and that throttle body, they're able to get better air velocity going into the engine by keeping that throttle body smaller at those low RPMs. So what I initially noticed out on the track is the bike doesn't have that crisp hit of some of the bikes in the class we're comparing to, such as the Yamaha, but it definitely has more roll-on grunt, and it has a little bit more response. Where the last bike was really flat feeling at low RPMs, it just felt like it took forever to chug and get into the mid-range. Now it'll actually pick up and pull itself a little bit better. I would say right off the bottom, your first like 2,000 to 3,000 RPM, it's really a minor change, but the mid-range is where it feels like they made the largest gain, getting to the point that the bike can be carried kind of a little bit gear higher in those long ruts a little bit better, because you can start in the middle of the RPM range and actually have it pick up and pull itself well, even if the conditions are a little bit on the soft side. I would say the quality of the change puts the 2019 CRF250R right in line with about what the KTM feels like for mid to top performance. It still doesn't have the roll-on grunt to basically hit a real tight rut, say in third gear, and let it go from the low RPM range and pick up. It'll still take way too long to get to that bottom end range without taking a lot of clutch usage. And then the other thing that stands out to me is really kind of where you have the bike positioned on the track, or what gear positions you're using throughout it. If you're on a really good flowing track that kind of has some constant momentum, I think the Honda stands out phenomenal because the chassis and suspension is so good. It's such a stable bike and easy to hang off the back, easy to ride aggressive. And with that mid to top end performance, it's really fun. It's when you get into the tight tracks that have those real hooked ruts where you're almost coming to a halt no matter how hard you try to hit them, and you have to drop to second gear, that the engine performance for me lacks the most, partially because the bike, it takes so long to roll off low RPMs, and the little bit of gear spacing. For me, when the bike can be ridden in third, fourth, and fifth throughout the track, it's really great jumps from gear to gear, and you feel like the power is always there or right on tap. When you're going from second to third, the gear ratio spread feels a little too wide for me. I feel like there's a lot of ruts where you're already really revved down second and having to immediately click third, but there's still a little bit of a gap of how it falls into third. And then if you try to hit that same corner in third, it's just too low in the RPM range to pull it. For me, I think one of the easiest fixes would to be to gear the bike up 1 to 2 teeth and try to focus on keeping the bike in its highest 3 gears around most tracks, if it's not such a fast track that you can give up a little bit in fifth. The other changes Honda did really were just carryovers from the 450. The new top triple clamp, which is multi-position, along with the bar mounts being swappable front to rear, it gives you 4 positions total. And then they finally went from a 7/8 inch handlebar to an 1 1/8 inch Renthal fat bar. The bar itself is a little bit stiffer. For me, I don't mind that on the 250, but the biggest thing I like is it's a lower bar bed. The previous Honda bar felt really tall to me, and I felt like I was always a little too upright in the saddle. And being that I'm around a little more the size of your typical 250 rider. I really like it because of how it allows me to sit into the bike in the corners, get a little bit lower, a little more on the front end, easier, and be able to kind of ride in more of that aggressive position. Even when standing up, be able to get a little more of that jockey set, stand up a little bit straight with the legs and roll the body forward, and be able to keep the shoulders ahead of the knees and be able to drive your momentum forward with your body. I feel like that really helps the aggressive nature and feel of the bike. The brake caliper is also an upgrade taken directly from HRC's Nissan caliper. It has two different size pistons. The leading edge is smaller and the exiting edge piston is larger. It puts more equal pressure on the brake. It really makes it, to me, the best of the Japanese brakes up against, like, say, what we see on the Brembo and the KTM. It has really good modulation, really good feel, and it's consistent. It's not too grabby because of the piston combination, and I really prefer the feel of it. You haven't really heard me talk about the suspension chassis much on this bike because it is a carryover from the 2018. It was really well regarded, hit up our first impression, our shootout. For me, it was a bike I really liked in shootout last year. I only made a couple fork changes just depending on track conditions. I ran a 108mm sag. I'm really happy with around what the stock balance of the bike is. And what I think is really good is last year the suspension chassis was so well rounded across all of our riders, but the engine only worked for the guys that could hang it on the knife edge at all time, and it only worked on those really spread wide open tracks. With the power adjustments they've made on the 19, I think it really brings this bike back from that kid coming off a 125 that really knows how to hang it out, and brings the 19 more into the range of a typical Joe Blow, somebody who can really appreciate how good the chassis and suspension is on this bike, but can get away with the updates to the engine. They can really appreciate more the top end pull because the mid-range can get you there quicker now when you make a mistake, or just if you're not the guy that really hangs it out. So at the end of the day, for me, yes, the 19 is better in pretty much every aspect than the 18. If I was on the dealership floor picking one, the price isn't too big of a difference. I'd recommend the 19.